Whether you call it kveik, kvik, or kvike, there's no denying that this unique Norwegian yeast has had a remarkable impact on the brewing scene, and Imperial Yeast's A43 Loki is one of the best versions out there. With the ability to produce a clean beer when fermented as warm as 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, you heard that right, while also performing well at more standard ale temperatures, Imperial Yeast A43 Loki is as versatile as it gets, meaning you have zero excuses for failing to brew throughout the year. Learn more about A43 Loki at imperialyeast.com and grab a pouch for your next batch to see what all the fuss is about. There's really nothing like cracking open that first bottle of beer from a batch you spent hours brewing a few weeks earlier, then waiting another few weeks to drink. That is, until you swap those bottles out for kegs, which not only requires less time at packaging, but allows for much quicker carbonation times. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this exBEERience episode to talk about building draft systems at home is contributor Andy Carter.
I think, the first level up moment when you get into homebrewing is like fermentation temperature control, because it unlocks just the quality level. But I got to say, I think the next one is kegging, because your beer's coming out faster, it's coming out fresher, it's coming out more consistent, and actually it's going to be cheaper overall for you to do it this way, even though the upfront costs are high. So, I am all about kegging.
Dude, I'm telling you, it is definitely not our point in this episode to crap on bottling, diss people who prefer doing it that way or anything like that. But our aim in this episode, rather, is to spend some time digging into our experiences building and using the various draft systems that we have over the years.
I think that, though we will not talk about it in this episode, there is a place for bottling in specific styles. It's the better way to do it, in my opinion. But I think the vast majority of fresh beer, kegging is the way to go.
Yeah, and there are going to be people out there who, are going to say, no, bottling is just better all the way around. More power to you. We're not trying to convince anybody. If you happen to have zero aspirations of ever moving from bottling to kegging, that's all good. You can maybe skip this episode, or this episode will be here when you happen to change your mind.
Absolutely.
We really do hope that our discussion of our experience can make the prospect of building a draft system seem a little bit less daunting for those who are interested. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up later this month is the weirdo who back in 2014 thought it'd be fun to share his brewing experiments with the world and started a thing called Brewlosophy. Me. That's right. I'm going to be sitting down for an hour or so with patrons to answer questions, whatever questions you guys want to throw at me. I'm an open book, and maybe even take some requests. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, be sure to make your pledge by Friday, November 20th. Past guests have included people like the new IPA author Scott Janish, homebrewing legend John Palmer, and Russian River Brewing Company's Vinny Chilurzo, the videos of which are all available to watch whenever you like over at our private Facebook page. Again, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy to see all of the neat rewards we offer in exchange for your support. And if you wouldn't mind taking the very small amount of time that it takes to let us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would really, really appreciate it. When you leave those reviews, it makes us more visible to people who may not have heard of us. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in triclover-compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Alistair Dinning from Quebec, Canada, had some feedback on a topic we discuss often and is somewhat relevant to this particular episode. He said, "We've heard you guys talk about the concerns of cold side oxidation, purging kegs, balloon locks, and more. These all seem to be kegging related issues. For those of us who bottle condition, I believe there's one element that helps: yeast. I don't consider myself a sloppy brewer, but bottling involves siphoning from carboy to bucket, mixing in the priming sugar, then siphoning to the bottles. There's little chance to protect from oxygen ingress. But as bottle conditioning relies on a little yeast to carbonate and yeast relies on oxygen to work, a little oxygen pickup isn't such a bad thing because the yeast cleans up the oxygen picked up during the transfers. I could be wrong, but is it reasonable to say that cold side oxidation just isn't such a big deal for bottlers?" Yes, I've heard this claim a million times before, Alistair, that during bottle conditioning, conditioning, yeast metabolizes whatever oxygen is picked up at bottling. On some level, it sort of makes sense to me. And I've definitely had some really good bottle conditioned IPA. I don't think I've had a bottle conditioned New England IPA yet. Not oxidized. They taste all right. So is that the reason? I really can't say for sure, but it does make sense to me. Andy, maybe you have a different idea?
Yeah, no, I think I agree in the vast majority of it. Like cold side oxidation to me means a lot of different things. I think there's also just the aspect of just aging, beer aging, and that time spent 2 weeks carbonating is aging the beer more.
Yeah.
I did throw this out to Charlie Bamforth. He just sent him an email one day months ago, and he actually got back to me. I said, ask him about oxygen and yeast. He says, if yeast has a chance, it will eat the oxygen. So his kind of statement is, if yeast ever has ability to do it, it's going to take it up. But, I mean, there's a limit to that. It can only eat so much oxygen before it's going to start doing other parts of its metabolism. So I would say this guy is right in the sense that, hey, you're going to put some oxygen in, it's going to eat it. But, I mean, you could always put too much in and then just hurt the whole process. So yes and no.
Yeah. I just got an email from somebody who works for, I think it's Anton Par. They make a bunch of the really high end measurement devices for brewing and other things, of course. But they were talking. This guy who reached out to me was looking to collaborate on some experiments involving dissolved oxygen, measuring all of that and whatnot. And this would be a good one to take up, I think.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Because it makes sense to me that the yeast is going to take up that oxygen. That's what it does. Sure. And I mean that is a claim that goes back as long as I've been brewing and much further, I'm sure. So thank you for the feedback, Alistair. I'm with you. I do think that there's something about bottle conditioning that does mitigate the negative impacts of oxidation, at least on some level. So if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. So we have family down in Los Angeles. Andy, I know that you're down there as well. And while we haven't been able to go see them this year due to all the COVID crap, we typically make it down there, from Fresno about 3 or 4 times a year. Now, typically when we end up driving back home is in the afternoon time, which means that we get to stop for lunch. And as a craft beer lover, that usually means we're going to some sort of a beer place. One of my favorite spots to stop for lunch on my way back up from Los Angeles is Tembler Brewing Company in Bakersfield, California. They have this really beautiful warehouse style brew pub. It's huge. The food is amazing. The beer's actually really quite good. Well, Tembler was one of the breweries who had a booth at the 2017 Clovis Craft Beer Crawl, and one of the beers they were serving was their oatmeal stout.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
It is not good. It's like soap.
Damn it, Tim.
I'm going to wash my dog with.
I haven't tasted it yet, but I'm angry at you because all you had to do was say it tastes like oatmeal and stout, and people would have thought we know what we're doing. You've condemned us.
They will know what I'm doing when they taste this.
Go ahead, Uncle Joe.
To be honest, the raisiny character of this makes it feel more Belgian than stouty. So either they're lying to us, like the government, or they just don't know how to make beer.
Well, I guess the government probably doesn't know how to make beer. Hey, the government used to know how to make beer. Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, brewers, all of them. Even Thomas Jefferson. Okay, hang on. This is actually pretty good. You don't like this?
I don't like this.
Take another sip. Why you guys?
The more I drink it, it is tasting better.
It's
but
pretty good, dude.
right
Come
at
on.
first, it wasn't that good to me.
So it's actually pretty smooth, like when I drink it.
It is smooth.
There's not a harsh follow. There's nothing.
there's
It's
no
a very
harsh.
smooth beer. I would drink this beer. In fact, if I told you this is a great beer and gave it to you, you'd be like, it is. It's a great beer.
You're probably right. That's
But
a
now
little
that you're on your stage, you're like, I must criticize this beer in order to feel important.
Now, the first few sips weren't so good for me, but the more I drink, it's all right.
Uncle Joe, the government doesn't want you to like this beer. You'd like it.
It's you're right, 100%.
Tool of the state. It's delicious. I like this beer. It's very good.
It's good to the
I would
proletariat.
not have it on tap at my house.
I love oatmeal stout because of its velvety mouthfeel and medium body, along with those coffee and cookie-like flavors. Tembler's oatmeal stout was okay. It just seemed to be really thin on my palate, which I'm guessing is what Timmy may have not liked about it. He kind of got that sharpness. The flavors were fine. I didn't get a Belgian character, but I can sort of see where Uncle Joe was coming from with the raisin thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard because we're only getting a minute of stuff, but I can see what you're saying. If it's thin, it's not really delivering on the experience of the beer. So you're like, I was going in for wanting something, and then that's why it's negative. But
yeah,
I mean, I'll give it a shot. It sounds like a cool place to go to too, as well. So
yeah, they've actually got, usually when we go there, they have a Pilsner of some sort on, whether German or Bohemian, and That's actually really quite good. All right, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in, reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we're back from this short break, our focus will be on building draft systems. Brewlosophy is headquartered out of Fresno, California, a quaint city in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which has been ravaged by wildfires this season. Closest to home is the Creek Fire. In fact, I was camping with my family when it started, and we all had to be evacuated. This fire has grown to become the largest wildfire in California's history, and most of the structures destroyed were primary residences. Rebuild Our Sierra is a grassroots, long-term fundraising effort created by a few dedicated mountain people with the goal of helping those who have been affected by this wildfire. They know that when the smoke clears and the relief organizations move on, the mountains and foothills will need help to rebuild, revive, and renew. Find out more by following Rebuild Our Sierra on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to visit rebuildoursierra.org. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. I absolutely trust and appreciate that my experience is wholly subjective and that others hold completely different views, so I say this without trying to influence anyone, but I honestly don't think I'd be where I'm at today with brewing, both personally and with Brewlosophy, if I hadn't decided to make the switch from bottling to kegging when I did. The packaging process is easier, beers are ready sooner, and no joke, it's just badass being able to pull delicious pints of homemade beer whenever I want. I love it, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I think as everyone does when they're homebrewing, they start out with a kit and they're going to, the first thing they're doing is bottling. They're probably not just jumping into kegging. And I mean, to be honest, I was in grad school when I started homebrewing, so I wasn't going to go and do a kegerator and all that stuff.
Right.
But eventually I was like, okay, I think it's time. And it was only a few years in and I got a keg, and now fast forward, I've built and rebuilt keezers multiple times. I think I have like 15 corny kegs now. I feel very comfortable doing it, but I'm still learning stuff every day about kegging and the whole draft line process.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. I was going now. We're going to focus on building draft systems here, but I figured we can maybe tell our little bit of our history when it comes to kegging beer. I'd been brewing. off and on, there was a brief hiatus when I was in grad school, but really about 6 or 7 years at the point where I decided to jump into the whole kegerator thing. I was brewing with my buddy Chris, and we were brewing every weekend, pretty much every other weekend at the very least. We got super hooked and always wanted more beer on hand, and we were sick of bottling. So I hit the internet and I just found this. There was a sale on this it would hold 2 Pinlock kegs, and it was a small little refrigerator. I think they're called Danby, with a tower on the top and 2 faucets, and that was it. And jumped into that thing. It was awesome. It was so cool, but it was a pre-built version. I did not build this thing. I bought it off the internet. It was surprisingly expensive. I guess I didn't do my research ahead of time, because I only ended up hanging on to that kegerator for maybe 3 months before I sold it and decided to build my first kegerator.
Yeah. I think, and not so, when I was brewing, starting, getting the temperature control, I would take those old college dorm stuff, fridge type things, and I would extend it out so it could fit a full PET carboy or a bucket. And then when I started kegging, I would put it in there too. Mostly the kegging was driven by, I was drinking a lot of hoppy beers. And I'm like, well, if I want these hops even better, I need to start kegging these things just to keep the freshness level up. And then ever since then, moved on through keezers and all that kind of thing. But I haven't gotten too big. We'll talk about keezers and why one over the other. But I only have like 3 or 4 beers on tap at any given time. I got friends that have the 8 tap, the big dogs. But yeah, it's impressive.
Well, so I don't want to talk down to people who prefer just going out and buying a pre-built kegerator system. They work. They'll do the job. But there are definitely some cons to them that I experienced. The first one was you could only fit 1 or 2 kegs at a time, and for people who just want 1 or 2 beers on, fine, that's great. But I brew more than that. I don't drink as fast as I brew, basically. But the other thing that really, really killed me about this particular system that I had was the faucets on it were just those chrome classic. And if you didn't pour a beer out of that thing for 2 days, it was like you had to get like a hammer to open the freaking faucet. I mean, they're not forward sealing. I believe they're called, they have a valve relief hole in the back of it. So but they get sticky. They're known for that. You have to use them often in order to avoid that. And so that was the real reason I was like, those 2 things. I wanted more beer and I wanted better faucets. My goodness. Now, when it comes to home draft systems, there's really 2 main options. You mentioned them earlier, Andy: kegerators and keezers, the details of which we are going to discuss a bit later in the show. But regardless of which direction one decides to go, both require the same gear, more or less. So I thought we'd kick this off by going over the various parts needed, starting with the most recognizable piece of pretty much any draft system, which are faucets.
So this is the place the beer comes out of. It's got a handle and it's got a spout, and guess what? You pull that handle and beer comes out. Now, you can be as simple or as complicated as you want, and what's great is, I think, what kind of faucets you buy also kind of have like your own kind of personal touch. So the most basic ones are just they open and close. You can get them in chrome, you can get them in stainless steel, and we'll talk maybe about why certain materials are used in certain areas. And then, but faucets get more complicated than that. You can buy faucets that are nitro taps that kind of foam up the beer. There's high pressure faucets. There's pressure regulating faucets, and then there's lockable ones. They're all over the place. And actually, now since craft beer has been expanding, you're seeing even more kind of throwback faucets. There's one in particular for slow pour pilsners that's actually not what I'll call digital, which is on or off. It has a sliding arm.
Yeah.
So you can kind of get some foam or get some beer. So there's all this new stuff coming out.
I've used so many faucets, and my story of how I kind of evolved through this is actually quite interesting. My ethos when it comes to faucets in general is, there's a song by David Bazan called Fewer Moving Parts, where he says fewer moving parts means fewer broken pieces. That is the whole flow control thing, and I'm just not a fan. I've used those things. I've decent quality, like big name faucets with the flow control. I've seen leak. I've seen not be able to control the flow very well. Really get foamy pores, stuff like that. To me, you want to balance your system on the inside of the kegerator or the keezer, and then your faucet should just be a nice, clean piece of hardware that does its simple job of pouring the way you want it to pour. I talked about the chrome faucets that I had first. I will never, ever use those again. I would never recommend them. If you love them, you love them. That's great. I do not. As soon as I was done with those ones, I built my first kegerator, which, again, a kegerator is just a refrigerator that you convert into a serving unit, a draft system. And into that one, I did use the Perlick faucets. I believe they were the 525 stainless steel. Andy, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about the material. I've gone back and forth on whether chrome or stainless is a big deal. I'm not sure I care at this point, but I will say that the Perlicks are the forward sealing, and that's a big thing right now. Most of the good faucets out there that you're going to see people recommending are forward sealing faucets, right?
Yeah. So, the material quality, I think in general, if you're building your kegerator and you want to have this thing stick around for a while, I would go stainless because the corrosion is, it's not there. It's not, it's if everything is well passivated, you're not going to have corrosion issues, which means weird metal flavors or stickiness is not going to come out as quickly or as much, if ever.
Yeah.
Now, I would say one reason to do chrome, and I think why your original system had it, is that your system was really meant for like pouring at a party where you're just pouring constantly and you're beating these things up and you're pouring a lot. And that's when it's just like, well, I'm buying new faucets on a weekly basis because I'm a restaurant or something like that. You don't care as much. Now, I think that in general, the people have gravitated to stainless anyways, so I think it's kind of, a moot point. Along with the fact with that chrome stuff, if it's going to corrode and have little pockets of places for bacteria to hide and all that, I mean, it's just a mess, right? So I personally, I've never used the chrome ones except for the rare camp out one where it's like it's got a faucet, it's got the adapters, and you're just throwing it on there, and that's it. You don't care if you ever see that faucet again, right? You're just downgrading it, and you don't care. So I would say if you're going to do the kegerator, I would go with the stainless. Even if I know they're going to be more money, but I do think long run you're not going to replace that faucet unless it totally fails for some other reason.
Right, and they are more expensive relative to chrome versions. Now there's Chrome with a K, and that's a brand. They're the ones who make, no offense to Chrome with a K, but they're the ones who make the crappy faucets I'll never buy again. Sure. What we're talking about is Chrome, the material, the metal. Usually with higher end faucets, you have a choice between one made of chrome or chrome plated, and then one, I believe it's brass underneath, and then one that's stainless steel. So I personally am stainless as well. I've built a few where people were trying to pinch pennies a little bit more, and they got the chrome, and I mean they've had them. Jersey and Tim both have chrome on theirs, and they've been running them for 3-4 years, and we're not having issues. Sure. But it is arguably stainless is more durable. Back to faucet brands though. So I went Perlick 525 SS with my kegerator. I went and I built a keezer. We're going to talk way more about that in a bit, but I went and I built a keezer. Went with a Perlick because everybody liked Perlick, but there was certain things about the Perlick that I wasn't a big fan of, and the main one was how loose the faucet handle was. And I'm not talking about like loose on the nut. I'm talking like it never felt solid to me. And I started getting leaks. I had 7 faucets at once, and finally at some point, and I'd close it and it would still leak out. It was really annoying. In order to get it to stop, I had to unplug my keg from it, disconnect the keg. So that really drove me nuts. I hit the internet. This was probably, 4.5 years ago. And I discovered this brand called Ventmatic, and I reached out to the website. Their contact form, and I get a call back from the owner who I mean, you talked my ear off about how great his faucets were. And so I picked up a whole bunch, and they were fantastic. I didn't have a single issue with them. I wrote a review on them. And then shit hit the fan with Ventmatic. Apparently they had it was a really crazy story. I don't want to get too deep into, but they had some knockoffs that a part of a lawsuit, this Chinese manufacturer had to give them all of the knockoff stuff. And apparently they were shipping that stuff out to customers, and that became a big mess. And once all of that got taken care of, I believe a company called Kegging or Kegland out of Australia ended up striking up a deal with Ventmatic because Kegging was making intertap taps, air faucets, and they were using the same design. Somehow they got their hands on the Ventmatic design. It's a crazy story, but come to today, you've got intertap faucets that are exactly the same as the old Ventmatics that I used to have, and I absolutely love them. I've had them on my keezer at this point for 3 or 4 years. No leaks, no issues. They're nice and solid. They feel like they're built like a tank, and they have a ton of cool little adapters. So that's a lot on faucets. What are you running on your keezer right now?
Yeah. So I have a Perlick. And I will say that I never had those leak things that a lot of the homebrew talk threads and stuff. I know you guys have talked about it. Like I've been maybe fortunate, blessed. I don't know. But I only have a few faucets, right? 3. Actually, on mine, I have 4 faucets, but one is dedicated to CO2, which we'll talk about later, and why that I do that. But then, so 3 faucets, and then I did buy one of the Paralic flow control ones, and I'm kind of with you there. It's never really worked that well.
Yeah.
My understanding, I talked to some guys about it, or talked to some pro brewers about it, and then I actually know now that I've been hanging out with more and more commercial guys. I met some actual draft techs. And there's something about the pressure that's going into it. So, like on our we'll talk about this more later. What we're calling short draw systems, or these homebrew systems, where there's short distances, the pressures are fairly low, and I think that those things actually need a higher pressure to work correctly. I'm not 100% sure. I could be a little off on that, but there's definitely something going on there that doesn't work as well. I've tried everything. It always when I would start, it would always foam up a little bit every single time. And I'm like, what is going on? This is not supposed to do this. So I abandoned it. And I did go to those the inner tap ones. I put one of those on to replace the flow control, and I love it.
Yeah, that's all I'm using at this point now. I'm actually in the process of selling my 7-tap keezer because I don't ever have that much beer on hand anymore, and rethinking how I want to serve beer. I think I'm going to move to a kegerator again just to save some space in my garage. But that's one of the things that you got to consider is the type of faucet that you want to go with. Now, in order to make that faucet pour beer, there are a bunch of things you have to connect in line. We won't spend too much time talking about these smaller pieces, but they are important and necessary parts for making a draft system. Right connected to the back of the faucet, whatever you're connecting your faucet to, this is the shank is what goes through whether it's a collar on your keezer or through your refrigerator door or whatever. And shanks also, like faucets, come in 2 different materials. You can get them chrome plated or you can get them stainless. What are your thoughts on I would imagine that you have this similar thought about shank material as you do faucets.
Yeah. I mean, stainless is the way to go. In general, there's not many options here for shanks. You're going to go buy your faucets, and they're going to have a thing, a list of them. In general, this is doing is how thick is the wall between the cold side, the fridge side, and the room temperature side. Your whatever you're serving it from. So you can buy these in all different lengths. But one thing I've been actually doing is they're not just for liquid, they're for gas too. They can any fluid. And I actually use them to have the tank, my CO2 tank on the outside of my kegerator, and I just have gas as a manifold going into the manifolds, so on and so forth, inside the thing. So, you can use them for both things, but yeah, I mean, moral of the story here is, if you're investing in the system, go stainless. I really don't think it can go wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you on the shanks as well. I've actually I was helping a friend disconnect and kind of clean up and fix a keezer that he had made, and one of his shanks was chrome plated. I believe he thought he bought a stainless and they shipped him the wrong one, but he'd only had it together for 3 or 4 years, and you could see brass coming through. I mean, the chrome plating, that chrome plating is going somewhere, probably into your mouth and your gut.
Exactly.
And I don't remember tasting metal beer from my friend, but I'd rather not have that. So that's something to consider. Now, once you get your shank, again, like Andy said, you want to pick the right size, and you don't want them to be too long. Any length will work, but they really do get in the way depending on the type of rig you're building. So just get the right size. I think pretty standard is about 3.5 inches to 4.25 inches, something like that. And then at the end of those shanks, you're going to attach a tailpiece and a nut. You can buy complete units that have all of that stuff together. And if it's all stainless, that's what I recommend. It just makes it really easy. And that nut is usually a barb, or it's a barb connector that you put your beer line onto. It works really, really simple. When you're piecing one of these things together, it starts to look like a lot of small parts, but it's a puzzle that's pretty easy to put together in my experience.
Once you get it is a little, even for me, it was kind of harrowing when I'm like, how many pieces do I need to buy and all this stuff? Luckily, the websites do the packages so you can see all the pieces together and you can look at videos and pictures and stuff. Yeah. But realistically, it's just a small number of pieces. It just gets kind of daunting when you're like, oh, now I have to do this 8 times or whatever if I'm building a huge system. Yeah. But yeah, that tail piece is going to have a nut on it that is a flare to your liquid line, and there's some more fancy lines out today that we'll talk about later that aren't actually using clamping and barbs and stuff. But It goes on the back with an O-ring to keep the fluid in, and you tighten it up, and you're all good to go.
Yeah, very, very easy to put together. The next piece of equipment or gear that you need is beer line, and I think this is an important one. It deserves a little bit of focus because I can't tell you how many times I've heard from somebody, I've gotten an email from a listener who, is wondering why they can't pour a non-foamy beer out of their brand new kegerator or keezer. And one of my first questions is, one, what is your beer line length? And two, what size of line did you go with? And usually 1/4 inch inner diameter beer line mixed with really short length is the issue. And when you buy a pre-built kegerator, that is usually what they ship it with, is 1/4 inch, maybe like 5 foot of line. And unless you're serving it really, really slow, you're going to get a foamy pour.
Yeah. And I think this is, like you said, this is probably the first place where someone has just built their kegerator has the biggest issues, because it's not, unless you think about it and do some reading about how fluid flow works and pressure drops work, it can be kind of just, you throw your hands up in the air and just be like, well, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
What's going on in the keg is that you have to pressurize that vessel to carbonate it. It has to have an overpressure of CO2, and then that gets carbonation into the liquid. Now, what's cool about water, or fluid, or in this case water, it's got some alcohol in it, of course, but it's like 95% water.
Right.
Is that there's lookup tables at this temperature with this amount of overpressure, you get this much CO2, volumes of CO2 in the liquid. What's really cool about water is the lower the temperature is, the much less overpressure you need to put the same amount of CO2 in solution.
Right.
So once you get that keg cold and on PSI from your CO2 tank, then CO2 will go in, it'll diffuse through the liquid and reach equilibrium, and then have some amount of CO2 in the thing. The problem is, now you have to dispense that liquid, and you have to drop the pressure that you've built up over a distance of line to your faucet so it doesn't come out foamy.
Yeah. Yep.
That length, it can be two things. One is length of line, how long my line is, but actually what's more important is that diameter, because that's aerial, and that's with the square of the radius. So you need to actually really clamp the line down if you have a short line system.
Yes, and I know that there are different types of beer line out there. I believe, Andy, you're actually using Evo barrier or something like that.
Yeah. I've gone through all types of line, and I think it's good to talk about those different types of line. But today I'm using the EVA barrier.
Right, and I actually just bought a whole bunch of that for the new kegerator that I build. And the thing to keep in mind is that is measured. Their inner diameter is measured in millimeters. So I believe you've got the option of 4 millimeter and 5 millimeter. Just go with the 4 mil. I'm going to just say this off the bat. Go with 4 millimeter. Don't go any shorter than 10 foot. I go up to 15 per faucet because I'd rather have a slow pour that's not all foamy and can withstand the type of carbonation that I prefer in most of my beer, which is pretty spritzy. Just go with a minimum of 10 foot. If you go up to 15 foot, you're probably going to be happy with that as well. And always stick with either 3/16 inch or 4 millimeter. You'll be happy with it. And that is just, I can't tell you how many times people haven't thought about this in building their systems. And that was the simple fix, was just swap out your beer line, make it better, make it longer, and smaller inner diameter. So now, obviously, anybody who's homebrewing and who's even dabbled in thinking about going to kegs, that there's a difference between ball lock and pin lock kegs. Really, besides the way the connectors, the disconnects, and the way that they connect pin lock, there's 3 little pins, as it's pretty obvious there. Ball lock, there's these 3 little balls that hold the disconnect onto the post. But the other things you got to consider when you're looking whether to go pin lock or ball lock is price. Ball lock, in my experience, is notably more expensive. I think it's because it's more popular. And ball lock kegs are of a different dimensions. They're slightly taller and a little bit skinnier. So depending on the type of rig you're planning to build, you might want to go with one over the other based on their size.
Yeah, so this used to be a Hatfield and McCoy situation between homebrewers. There is the ball lock crew, the pin lock crew. I was coming in, a little younger than the rest of the people in my homebrew club to home brewing and kegging. So I was actually finding at the time 10 years ago, pin locks were dirt cheap compared to ball locks.
Oh, yeah.
And I would be made fun of because I would bring I'd bring pin locks to parties and no one had the fittings for them. I'd always bring my own fittings too. Now, today, I think that is, that's done. What you will find is, if you're buying used equipment from someone, it could be a mix, it could be one or the other. I think I say most new kegs, because there's not as many used kegs anymore. The new kegs are all ball lock. I don't think I've seen a new pin lock keg.
Nope.
And so one thing is, okay, pick one. You can always buy fittings for both. I personally like pin lock kegs because the fitting is a little more secure and you can't mix up gas and liquid as easily. The other reason to do it, if you're kind of getting into homebrewing now and you're just kind of building out your stuff, is, and if you like making clean beers and sour beers, what I've seen people do is put clean beers in one type of fitting and sour beers in another type of fitting so they can never mess that up.
Yeah.
They're never incorrect about it. Now, you have to, of course, keep a supply of both, but that is one reason to pick one or the other or have both in your system.
I completely agree. I actually do have both in my garage, but I am so team Pinlock. And I'll be honest, the only reason I went with Pinlock in the beginning when I started was because they were cheaper. But I also, the benefit, like a post hoc benefit that I realized, you already mentioned it, you cannot mix up the gas and the beer line on a Pinlock keg. It just can't happen because the pins don't fit. They're in different positions. So if you are like me and you are typically kegging beer while drinking beer, it's a kind of a better safe than sorry type of thing when going with Pinlocks, because you're not going to get beer shot up into your manifold or anything like that.
It is the negative of the ball, because the ball locks, I can't remember if like the liquid fits on the gas or the gas fits on liquid, whatever. You can mess those up, and it's just annoying.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. I'm rethinking my draft system right now, and I'm actually considering ball lock, but only because I really like those torpedo kegs that More Beer sells.
Yes.
And so that being the case, what I will absolutely do is mark with a big Sharpie on my new kegs, should I go that route, liquid, gas, because I don't want to mix them up. That could really screw up your regulator. Now, speaking of gas, there is an entire set of stuff that you've got to get just to manage the CO2. The first one being a cylinder. Really, the only thing to discuss there, I think, is size. You can buy used cylinders. That's what I recommend. Usually, when you go to have your gas, your CO2 cylinder filled, at least where I live, it's a swap. So don't go off spending money on a cylinder that looks pretty. You're probably going to end up swapping it out anyways for one that's rusty and ugly. At least that's the case over here.
You can get them in there in pounds. So the 5-pounder is a very common beginning one, or you can go up to 20. You can go big, right? So the one thing I would say here, or the couple points I have is, if you have a small one, you're more likely to be able to get it filled at a homebrew shop because they have the system that's small enough that can fill it. And it's all those things. You go bigger, you're going to have to find some draft, people, some draft company. Luckily, I have one. I live near LA, so there's tons of draft people. And what you can do is you can go give them a 20 and they'll fill it right there.
Yeah.
You can buy it from them. They don't do swaps though. The only people that do swaps for big ones are like Air Gas, like big companies.
Yes.
And let me tell you, they charge a premium. So if you're really dead set on doing big CO2 tanks, just make sure your supply chain is figured out. And the last thing I'll say is, when you get a bigger tank, you're going to want to probably bolt that to a wall. You do not want that thing falling over and creating a rocket. So just be careful when you go to big tanks. Just think about what you're doing. But I do recommend them.
Yeah. So do I. I actually have 2 10-pounders and 2 really 3 5-pounders, but one of them is kind of just gets spun around with my friends who need to borrow one. But if you're carbonating your beer, which you are going to do inevitably through forced carbonation with gas, a 5-pound tank is fine. I believe I'm not 100% accurate on this, but I believe you can get between about 10 and 12 beers carbonated and served out of a 5-pounder. But that's not like burst carbonation where you're using really high pressure CO2. I think you're probably going to reduce down to maybe about 6 batches total with a 5-pounder. So what I do is I keep a 10-pounder in my keezer. I keep a second 10-pounder next to my keezer for when that one goes out. And then I keep 2 5-pounders as kind of floaters that I use to purge kegs. I use them for, all that stuff, pushing beer out of a fermentation vessel into a keg. It's really nice to have. The thing is, you have to have a regulator for each tank that you plan to use. So I've got two separate primary regulators that one is in my keezer and the other one stays permanently attached to one of the other like floating CO2 cylinders that I've got in my garage for all of the other uses that I use it for.
Yeah, and I have this big 20-pounder for the main kegerator. I change that thing out once every 6 months, 8 months, because it's just carbonating. It's and pushing beer. It's not really doing anything else. I also have the original, my original first, Andy's first kegerator 5-pounder that I just use to float around, empty sanitizer out of kegs, top off CO2 into other kegs that are just hanging around if there's aging beer or whatever. And then those work great. And then I've added, extra, I made teas and splits and stuff so I can do multiple kegs simultaneously. It's super flexible.
Yeah. It's awesome. I love having a couple extra tanks around. Also, when one of my local friends runs out, they always know they can call me up and grab a cylinder. Okay. So again, we were talking about CO2 tanks. In order to make those work, you have to have a CO2 regulator, a primary regulator. Now, one of the mistakes that I made when I was building my first kegerator was I thought it was really smart to buy the primary regulator that had the dual product, so it had like a T built into it. Those aren't bad. If you're serving two beers, they're actually quite nice. But what I found was that you most likely you're going to have another, like a manifold anyways, or some form of a secondary regulator, that you really just don't need the dual tap thing, unless again, you're doing just two beers and you like to have those beers carbonated and served at the same pressure. That'll work fairly well. I don't know what you're using, but
I mean, my CO2 tank, I actually added a second regulator to it, so it's coming off at two different pressures. Your T situation is where you don't have any other manifolds, and by manifolds, these are other pieces of metal usually that just can have on-off valves or check valves, so you can have as many kegs as you needed. The downside of that is they're all at the same pressure. Right. So regulators take the pressure. The tank is under thousands of psi, and it puts it down to 10 psi. You can buy multiple secondary regulators to have 8 psi, 12 psi, 16 psi. So you're getting different pressures. But in general, I would say if you're building your first one, you're probably only picking one pressure to start with, and then you'll go from there. You can definitely get much fancier. And actually, one of my friends bought some inline regulators. They have no gauge, but you set them up, you calibrate them out of the kegerator, you put them in line, and then you get a special pressure for just that line. So that's a fancier version. He's mixed on it. He likes it, but basically that allows you to have very customized pressure without a ton of stainless steel, because each regulator is like, a few pounds. So,
well, I'll tell you, when it comes to manifolds and stuff, so when we talk about a manifold, what we're saying is you've got your CO2 tank, you've got your primary regulator, you've got a line coming off of your primary regulator going into a manifold that allows you to connect however many kegs. So the manifold just basically opens up the number of kegs you can connect to your single tank. I've had plenty of manifolds. I've used them. Like you said, the issue is that everything is served at the same pressure. Well, not only that, everything is being carbonated at the same pressure if you're doing that. And I remember having to go in when I had my three tap kegerator, and I would have to turn off the gas to 2 kegs so that I could burst carbonate one of my kegs. I hated doing that. So I dropped some coin. These things are not cheap, on what's called a secondary regulator. These things are so badass though. Basically what it does is it's a manifold, but each connection has its own gauge and can be set to whatever you want. So I've got my old dual primary regulator split off to 2 secondary regulators, and one has 4, one has 3. I have a 7-tap keezer. Each one of those. So I keep both set on the primary regulator to 50 psi, and then you set the pressure to each keg on the secondary regulator. It's not cheap, but I will never not do that. It's so nice being able to regulate independently each keg. I can't recommend it enough. If you're building one of these things and you want it to be around for a while and you want it to do everything you want it to do, pick up secondary regulator. They're awesome.
Yeah, the most famous commercial one, I would say, if it can be called famous, is the flux capacitor system at Beechwood Barbecue and Brewing down in LA, is that they have a regulator for each and every keg that they're serving so they can get exactly the right pressure.
Exactly.
Of course, it's expensive and it takes up a ton of space. If you're trying to be space conscious, this is not for you, but it's an option.
It is, yeah, and it does. Yeah, there's no denying it takes up more space. If you're building a keezer, though, it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
And I'm telling you, to be able to serve a super spritzy saison right next to a barely carbonated ESB, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It is awesome, and this is the only way to do that. And so again, you can balance your system or set up your system so that you have a faucet that's dedicated just to super duper carbonated stuff with 20 foot of beer line, and you have it served at 20 psi, right next to one that has 15 foot of beer line, and you're serving it at 7 psi. I mean, that's the nicest thing about a secondary regulator. I'll get off my soapbox here because I'm a huge fan of these things. One thing we didn't talk much about is the gas tubing. Really, these are 5/16 inch. I think that's pretty standard. You can get clear. There's a lot of red tubing out there you can get. That's what mine is. Just make sure those are long. There's no prescribed length for those. You just want to make sure they're long enough to reach every keg from wherever whatever regulator you have it plugged into. I made that mistake where I thought I was going to use the same regulator for a spot in my keezer. You don't do that. You're constantly switching them back and forth when you're swapping out kegs. So just make sure they're about 3-4 foot long. I think is pretty standard.
Yeah, I think there's they tend to be different colors so that that this is gas and this is liquid for a complicated system. I think over time though, I've learned I just buy the whatever they call gas line. It can take higher pressure because obviously this is going to be at it could be at 50 psi, so it has to hold that pressure. A thin line won't. But there is some. I would say the negative is it's thicker. So again, even though I have a keezer, it's smaller, and I have a space conscious stuff. So if you have 4 or 5 lines all flying around it can kind of all get in the way.
Yeah.
You can do a smaller diameter. Don't get me wrong. Just make sure it's rated for the psi, and then you can work with it. I think what's cool is some of the new stuff we're going to talk about, the John Guest or the push fittings. People are doing gas distribution with those and having a good success.
Yeah.
Because the line is thinner. So just do the research and see what pressures it can take, and then go from there. But the gas is not as restricted by the diameter as liquid is, because liquid has got turbulence. It's interfacing. It's interacting with the walls. That's where pressure drops are coming in.
Yeah.
The gas lines can be a smaller diameter and not affect you as much.
Yeah. Oh, I know people who are using 1/4 inch beer line for their gas.
Sure.
The problem with that is if you're going to burst carb like I do at 45 to 50 psi, you start running the risk of issues. You want to have a nice, the wall of that tubing to be fairly thick so it can withstand that pressure. Now, they're rated for way higher than 50 psi, but better safe than sorry. Now I do want to talk a little bit about these quick disconnects, in part out of selfishness because I have yet to use them, but I have a whole a bowl of them out in my garage right now. You're using the Duo-Tight ones, right?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is these are the interfaces between plastic and metal and all these. These are where lines come together and do something. They could be the gas part. They could be the liquid part. They can be all this stuff. And, the common one is, like we talked about with faucets and shanks, is stainless steel. You get the stainless steel barb, put your line in there. You're probably going to need a clamp or something.
Right.
And, of all these parts. And unfortunately, as you come to brew more and more and build these systems, you have the wrong clamp for the wrong this, and you miss this part and that, whatever. I mean, it can work. Everyone knows how to work with them. They're straightforward, but you can be missing parts. There's some new stuff on the market. They've come out of, irrigation systems and all these things, but they had different names. Duo-Tight or John Guest is the common one. What this is actually everything integrated into one piece. And you take the line for the right diameter. We mentioned the 4 or 5 millimeter stuff earlier, but it has an outer diameter, and you literally push the line into the fitting. And once it's pushed in, it's locked in because there's teeth that grab it and there's O-rings internally, and that's it. There is a way of removing it. You have to kind of do this dexterity thing to pull the line out to detach it, but then it just comes out. It's not messed up. It's not, it's not mangled by the barb. It's not, cut by the thing. It just works.
Yeah.
So it's something I've started to move all my stuff to because we can get into a much longer discussion about what's the right beer line and this and that. But in general, the beer lines are just getting all in the way, and this stuff just makes it so much simpler to move stuff and a lot easier to clean too.
That is my biggest thing. And again, when I built my keezer that I've got in my garage now, I just barely heard of John Guest fittings, and they were very expensive.
Yes.
This duo-tight stuff is cheap as hell. Surprisingly cheap.
It's cheaper than a lot of the other options on the market, which made me wonder, is like, did More Beer price this wrong? This seems too cheap. Yeah.
I know. I think I loaded up. So I actually bought all of this stuff after we did a review article. It's funny because we're equally as influenced by each other, I think, as some of our readers out there. But you wrote a piece on the Duotite, which have to be used, I understand, with the EVA barrier of tubing, right?
Yeah, well, it's all about the diameter, and I'm actually going to play around with that because I have other line, and I mentioned the line thing. You know, I used to run this super high-end, rigid, like Teflon coated line. It was meant for milk and soda and stuff. And, you know, it had no flavor pickup. Beer could sit in there for weeks. It would just taste fine. I would say anything lower than that, you get a little bit of flavor pickup, a little bit of residual, but it's the right diameter. So yes, if you're buying the stuff today, from whatever retailer, you're matching the outer diameter of the line to the fitting you're getting. I think they're all the same outer diameter, though.
Similar at the very least, yeah.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now, just to be clear, the thing about the Duotite and the John Guest fittings, these kind of modern ways of connecting beer line, and any line really, but to your draft system is you basically what you're doing is you're replacing your typical nut on the back of your shank with this plastic piece that has a connector built in, right? So you're what I love about this. So I change out my beer line at least once a year. It's not very expensive. The EVA barrier stuff lasts longer because it stays cleaner. Yep. It doesn't stain. And when I do want to swap it out, it's no more getting out my razor, cutting down the barb, the nipple to get that thing off. It's just so much cleaner, so much simpler. I'm really excited to build up a system that has that stuff. And
you're going to be more likely to clean your kegerator if it's easier to clean.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so doing it, and I think that's one thing, if we don't talk about it in more length, cleaning this stuff, you do have to maintain it. Their beer is sticky. Beer is going to hang around. You do want to get, some PBW, star sand of the whole works through your system.
Yes.
People say weekly, people do, every keg switch out, you want to pay attention to that. The one thing I will say that I've yet since the quick disconnects, the John Guest Duotite stuff that I've been using only for a few months, in mass. I had one test line for a while. Then I said, all right, I'm converting all of them.
Yeah.
I've been reading online. These things do not like star sand for long periods of time. So definitely, and like anything, if it's not rated to take the temperature or the chemistry, don't leave it in there for too long. So I would say overall for this, where you could pack star sand into some stainless steel for, as long as you needed to, be careful with this stuff. Don't leave chemicals sitting around there too long. Put water or beer back in there as soon as possible.
Yeah, you can buy beer line cleaner. They call it BLC on More Beer, or probably Amazon as well. I just leave a full keg of beer line cleaner next to my keezer. And as soon as I kick a keg, I take the liquid line off, put that onto the keg that's sitting right outside of my keezer, and I just run beer line cleaner through that line for about 15, 20 seconds. And then I know some people are against this, but I actually leave the BLC. It's a very, very diluted solution, so it's not super strong or acidic, but I just leave that in the beer line until I put another keg on it, usually, no longer than a week usually, but yeah.
Sure.
Well, that was a ton of information about a bunch of small parts, and as complicated as it may sound, it really isn't bad at all. I've made quite a few draft systems over the years. I know Andy has as well. When we're back from this short break, we're going to be discussing the differences between kegerators and keezers, as well as our experiences building and using both. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the exGEERitor, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, The Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exchillerator.com today to see what The Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. As I mentioned earlier, it took only about 3 months of using a pre-built kegerator for me to realize I wanted something better, a rig that had less issues and allowed me to serve more beer. After selling that heap of a kegerator, I found a used refrigerator on Kegslist, bought all of the parts we just talked about in the past segment, and built my first kegerator. Now, back then, I wasn't spending much time on the internet and thought the whole keezer thing seemed a bit cumbersome. I'd heard about them, I'd seen pictures, but kegerator was the word that came to mind when I was thinking of draft systems. So that was my decision, or what motivated my decision to use a fridge instead of a chest freezer. However, eventually, I did end up wanting even more space for kegs and made the jump into a keezer. One of the huge benefits to a keezer is that you can fit, well, depending on the size of freezer you get, you can fit however many kegs you want, really. They are very similar in functionality, but let's talk a bit about the differences between kegerators and keezers and our experiences with them.
Yeah, so a kegerator is most like a fridge because the temperature settings that the thermometer that comes with it is a fridge thermometer. It's
Right.
going to probably bottom out at like 32 Fahrenheit. It's not meant to be a freezer. These kind of look more like giant sized college fridges, right? They're not full fridges, but they can be. And then the other side of that is a keezer, and a keezer is just a portmanteau of keg freezer. They buy a freezer, a chest freezer for storing long storage for meats or frozen foods or whatever.
Yeah.
But you buy a temperature controller for it that defeats the internal one so that it doesn't go to freezing.
Right. It bypasses the thermostat in the chest freezer, the deep freeze. Yeah.
You set that one to the lowest temperature possible, so there's no delays. But it is the new temperature. It is the new thermometer for the keezer, for the freezer.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've heard argued in favor of keezers over kegerators is that because the thermostat in the fridge has such a small, temperature window. So most fridges I think control the inside of the fridge to 36 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 2 degrees C, I believe, plus or minus about 6 degrees. And that's, you can set it to be warmer or cooler. Well, a lot of people, particularly those who prefer English styles, want to serve their beer a bit warmer. If you have a keezer, you can do that. If you have a refrigerator, that can be a bit difficult. I like all of my beer to be served pretty cold because I'll leave it to the drinker to decide how long they want to wait to drink it to warm it up, or wrap their hands around the glass. So that's not an issue for me. But like you mentioned, that one of the things you have to consider when you're making a keezer is that you are going to have to get a temperature controller to bypass the thermostat in the chest freezer.
Yeah, and luckily, I think 10 years ago, these were kind of expensive things that were like, oh, I have to make the investment, which made the move to a kegerator actually more expensive. Nowadays, Inkbird, many other brands, they're much cheaper.
Yeah.
You can even get 2 stages, but in general, most people probably only need 1 stage.
Yeah, I think the 2-stage controllers people are using mostly for fermentation chambers, and if you're using a chest freezer for that, I keep mine at 36F because again, I like cold beer. That's just my thing, or I like it to start cold. Again, that's about 2C in the keezer. Now, one of the things that people will ask is, oh, do you need to attach the probe to a water bottle? Or I don't. I just let it kind of dangle in there, and that seems to work fine. So those those are the biggest differences between a kegerator and a keezer are footprint, right? A refrigerator has a smaller footprint, but it's taller. And then the amount of space inside. There aren't many refrigerators, residential refrigerators, that you can fit more than, I don't know, 3 kegs maybe. I think, and probably my favorite kegerator that I've used and have experience with is contributor Paul Amico. He does our Hop Chronicles stuff. He's got a fairly wide refrigerator that can fit 3 Ballock kegs, maybe 4, but I think it's just 3. But then his faucets are on the side of the fridge as opposed to being in the front. So it's got a really nice feel to it. And from the front, and that's one of the things we'll talk about with kegerators is faucet placement. But one of my favorite thing about a kegerator and why I want to go back to a kegerator now after this keezer is because I love having a freezer. And there's when you've got a refrigerator with your beer, then you can stake your claim to that freezer as being your hop freezer, and then the family can use the other freezer for everything else. Right now, my hops are in our garage refrigerator freezer, taking up the half of the freezer space, which is kind of a pain in the ass. And my family, my wife would really like to have that space back. So
absolutely. So there's another thing I've been considering. I've been doing keezers. I actually have multiple keezers. Some are for fermentation, some are for serving beer. Now, these are chest freezers. These are, open with a door. Then you have to lift your keg up and put into, not slide laterally, right? And, Marshall, me, we're both getting older. Now, this is starting to hurt. It's starting, puts a little bit more strain on my back and my shoulders. So if you're someone that can't lift that thing up and over and you don't want to deal with that hassle, then, you're kind of going more back to a fridge.
Yeah.
That being said, like you said, the space efficiency of a chest freezer is much higher because for the same footprint, you can definitely put more kegs in. And you can go, if you search online, there's a whole database. You can look up any model number you want, and they'll tell you exactly how many kegs can fit in it. Ball lock, pin lock, any size.
Yeah.
They've mapped out the square, the cubic feet inside of the keezer. So yeah, they're just efficient in that regard.
Absolutely. So kegerators now, let's talk about faucet placement real quick. I said, I sold this crappy pre-built kegerator that I bought after a couple of months, and I went and I found a refrigerator that would fit 3 kegs on Craigslist, brought it back home, and I started building this thing. I didn't even consider putting the faucets anywhere but the front of the refrigerator, so on the door. And so and that's fine, it works. The thing you have to remember is wherever your faucets are, you're going to have shanks poking through the door, and then your beer line connected to those shanks. That is going to be moving around. If you're opening that door, you're now moving the faucets and all of the stuff connected to it. So you've got to be mindful of how you're going to do that. I've seen people run their beer line through clips on the side of the refrigerator to kind of keep it out of the way. Hey, whatever floats your boat. I really do think there's a huge value though in going through the side of the refrigerator. That way your door is not tied down, so to speak, to your kegs,
Yeah. I'm struggling to think if I've seen them in videos, people that have the front taps. It kind of looks cool, that kind of thing. There's one, that like you said, first it's moving around. So it's warming up, it's cooling down. I mean, I think you're just going to end up with, slightly foamier beer overall over time. There is some risk if you open the door and then things fall out.
Yeah.
But the big reason I think most people go through the door is that they don't have to worry about cutting up any lines or any cooling lines in the fridge. And that's a big, you cut one of those. All right, see you later, fridge. That's a problem. So it's the flexibility of not worrying about the door or not worrying about hurting the door, but you have to be careful with where else you put your taps.
Yeah. So one of the solutions to the moving taps that I've seen with refrigerator kegerators is if you place your faucets to as close to the hinge side of the door as possible, so that now it's moving less, and it's also the angle it's not as obtuse, so it's not moving as much. That's probably what I'll end up doing, just because in my garage, when I'm where I'll be placing my kegerator, we'll have another refrigerator on one side and then my workbench on the right side. So there's really it'd be difficult for me to pour beer off of it. But those are things that you got to consider. Also, and now I don't know how big of an issue this actually is, but when you're trying to balance your draft system, there's something called head pressure, and that is basically the distance upward that the beer has to travel from the keg to the faucet. When you're building, at least in my experience, when I was using the kegerator, that distance was actually about, it was almost even. Whereas in my keezer with the collar and all of that stuff we'll talk about, it's more like 5 or 6 inches.
Yeah, I've done, I have the keezer, and we'll talk more about that next. But, I only have not too much. It's like a 2x4. So it's not very tall. So I've not had, I'm more almost parallel. But yeah, that extra pressure just adds to the restriction. So you have to play around with, well, what CO2 what level of CO2 do I want in the beer versus the line versus all this? And you can make the math work. There's options. You just have to weigh the options plus and minus.
Absolutely. Now, with building a kegerator out of a refrigerator, it is going to involve drilling. You got to get those shanks through the door somehow. I did not realize just how incredibly tough the outer lining of a refrigerator can be. Holy cow. You got to have a hole saw, and you got to make sure it's the right diameter hole saw, which I believe I'm using 15/16 inch. And I do that because I like to have my shank fit nice and tight. I don't want there to be any, cold air leaking out.
Yeah.
I want to keep it as efficient as possible. And I found that 15/16 is perfect for the 1 inch shank. So that's what works for me. One thing I have to tell people you have to consider, if you want to build a kegerator and have a drip tray connected to your faucets, let's say you're doing a 3-tap kegerator, please buy your drip tray first. If you're going to have the faucets go through the like a back wall on the drip tray, you're going to be really upset if you build this kegerator and 2 weeks later realize you want to install one of these awesome drip trays and it doesn't fit because you didn't measure it out. Just buy the drip tray first, trace out the holes, make sure it's level, drill your holes like that. You'll be perfectly happy.
Yeah, for all this stuff, measuring twice and cutting once is the name of the game.
Absolutely.
You do not want to go back to Home Depot 4 times. So, figure out the parts you want to do and lay it all out and then draw it and then sleep on it and then come back the next morning and double check your stuff.
Yes.
There's no rush here. What I do for my keezer is since I don't want to do any complicated drilling, my drip tray is actually magnetic. So it sits magnetically coupled to underneath the faucets, and it's got enough volume that once it fills up or gets dirty, I just take it off, rinse it off, and then put it back down. No problem.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend it just because, where you're serving your beer, you don't want a puddle of beer underneath the kegerator. That's just disgusting. So, definitely think about how to do the drip tray. Some people route it so it goes into a bucket that they can clean up and stuff. Just game it out so that you have it there and it's easy to clean. Again, the easier it is to clean the stuff, the more likely you're going to clean it.
Absolutely. Now, I love kegerators. I think there's a lot of pros to a kegerator. I already talked earlier about having a freezer that you can store hops and frozen burritos in. They're awesome. And you don't have to buy a temperature controller. The biggest drawback to a kegerator is you're not going to be able to fit as much beer in there as you could with, say, a 14 cubic foot chest freezer, which is what I've got right now. And I can fit 7 pinlock kegs in that bad boy. So, the other thing you mentioned it again, it's a lot easier to lift kegs up into a refrigerator than it is a big tall chest freezer with a collar on it. And one thing you want to consider when you're building a kegerator is the placement of the freezer. I was talking about Paul's I love his kegerator. Well, he has a bottom freezer on his. So that's where he stores all of his hops. But again, now he's got to lift those kegs up a little bit higher to get them into the refrigerator. So just little things like that, I would not recommend side-by-sides. You can't really fit that many kegs in a side-by-side. And also they tend to be a little bit nicer and you don't want to run the risk of ruining that kind of a refrigerator.
Yeah. Again, I think that's an excellent point is that these fridges, if you're thinking about selling it or moving it around, they just have resale value because they're still fridges, right? If you don't permanently modify parts of it, you can, repurpose these, especially the freezer part, which is critical and more than just the keg part. I mean, the freezing stuff, using it for other family stuff, it's highly useful.
Well, and another thing with kegerators is that removing empty kegs, but so with a keezer, they're all you open up the top of the refrigerator of the chest freezer, and you can grab kind of whatever keg you want if there's an empty keg, and it's fairly easy to get out. With a kegerator, you're usually got this you're kind of maneuvering to get kegs out, and you can shake up a full keg if it's in front of a empty keg. And so just things you want to think about when you're going in to building this. Now let's talk a little bit about building keezers, which I know you and I have a bit more experience with.
So I mean, I moved right into keezers. I think I had a fridge for a few months before I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to get more kegs going. So I did the keezer. So the main thing with the keezer is you got to add something to the taps work. You could go through the top of it and add a tower. I just don't like those towers because then it limits how many taps you can have. So I just ignored it. Tower builds are fine if you have the space. It really depends on what space you have for the thing you're building. But you're going to have to add a collar. And most of the time, more or less, these can be as simple or as complicated as you want. Most of the time, they are just 2x4s that have been screwed and glued together. And then you're going to add this to the top of the keezer. Now you have to do some measurements and think about glue or silicone or whatever, but eventually you have to commit to putting this collar down, and then you have to think about adding this door to that collar or somehow maneuvering the bolts so that it all works together. But once that's together, now you just have a extra space that you can customize with your taps.
Right. Now, yeah, the whole idea behind a collar is that you're giving yourself something to drill through and put those shanks into so that you can attach your faucets. And so you can use whatever you want. I've actually seen somebody use 8x2 2x8 because they just wanted more space, Sure. So you can kind of do what you want. And one of the things you'll read about is that wood is a poor insulator, blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. Honestly, I'll keep my keezer out it stays in my garage the entire year, and we get to 115 degrees Fahrenheit here in Fresno, and which is like 40 degrees C or something like that.
Sure.
It gets really warm, and I've got pine, on mine, and it works just fine. It's not like the outside of the collar feels cold or anything like that. So that's not something I'd be too. You see people going through all of this, the pain of insulating, applying foam insulation and stuff. I'm just not sure that's worth it. I think it's messy.
I don't think it is either. And I think the main, though, what I want to have everyone think about is now that you've modified the freezer, now you have to really kind of watch for air. And I think this is one thing that, it kind of comes up after you build it, and then you look around, you're like, wow, there's like liquid in here and stuff. So people build fans and everything. So first, when you're building this, make sure you got all sealed up. Getting the right hole saw. I was using the wood bit. It kind of just chips the wood away, so it's not a saw as much as it's a
spade bit.
A spade bit. Yeah, for wood, and it works great, and you get the right one. And then what I do is for the shanks, I wrap them in Saran wrap, so they get a snug fit once they're in and bolted together. So there's like kind of an air lock, air bridge. So you want to watch for that, and then inevitably liquid's going to get in there, or moisture in the air. So what I do is I didn't do the fan stuff. Some people do fans. I buy I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but it's essentially a dehumidifier, but it's powder. And then that just goes in the kegerator. It soaks up the moisture, so you're not getting a bunch of potentially mold buildup in there. And then you have to chuck them every few months, but they work well. There's also electric ones you can buy that just these beads soak up the liquid, and then you have to plug it in the wall for it to heat up and discharge it.
Yeah,
those don't work great, but there's options. It just kind of depends on how you do it. But if you do it right, you should seal it up and really not have a moisture issue.
Yeah, I actually do have like the small computer fan. That's just the route that I went. And again, you got to wire it up, and then you just kind of make your own little plug for it, and it's pretty easy. I'm not sure how helpful it is. I'm not using it for the dehumidifying purposes necessarily, but more to keep the airflow in the keezer moving, because I've got a 14 cubic foot chest freezer. Cold air falls, and what I don't want is for all of that really super cold air to stay at the bottom of the keezer while the air on the top is a bit warmer. I want it to be even throughout. So I'm not terribly sure how helpful it is, but I've had this fan running nonstop for, good Lord, 6.5, 7 years now, and it still hasn't broken. I mean, it just runs all the time.
I mean, it's a very important thing when you build a big one. I think that's absolutely critical because you don't want your lines to get too warm or too cold. You know, it's there's just space for air to get trapped, and I think that's important. That is a critical thing. So.
Now, I think one of the things with keezers that a keezer has over a kegerator is that it does open up more options for being artsy or decorative. There's a lot of things you can do with a chest freezer that you're trying to convert into a draft system. One of the first builds that I ever saw of a keezer where I was like, this is awesome. It's what kind of inspired my build. They used really nice maple as a facade. So they built their collar, and then over the collar, they attached stained, I believe it was maple. Looks gorgeous, nice hardwood. If you go take a look, I believe our Brian Hall, Brewlosophy's Brian Hall, has this on his Facebook page. But he made a keezer. He had this really nice piece of wood that had a natural edge from a tree, and he just made this thing beautiful, and that's his facade on his keezer now. It looks gorgeous. He painted the freezer red. I mean, so you can make it like a really pretty piece of furniture. And in speaking of that, we were talking earlier about towers, and you're limited in how many beers you can serve off of a traditional tower. But I believe they call these coffin keezers, where basically what they do is they install this like a chute up off the top of the lid of the chest freezer into what looks to be almost like a commercial draft serving system. But then the decorations and the way that people design these things is absolutely gorgeous. I've never seen one in real life, only pictures on the internet. I have to imagine that they're kind of a pain in the ass to work with in terms of getting beer in and out of them, but boy, do they look good. If you Google coffin keezers, you'll see a ton of photos. They're really nice.
Yeah. The more expansive you get into taking the freezers and really gussing them up and making them really artistic, I mean, that's just how you can put as much effort you want into that. You can just make it your own and really personalize it. I'm a little more of a utilitarian in that aspect. It's just the tap, so that's it. It's painted white, looks okay. No problems. But yeah, I mean, go crazy, because I think what's cool about this part of it is, well, the art of, the beer you're making is one thing, but you maybe want to show off, how you're serving it and stuff. And that's just bonus points.
Yeah. No. And again, there are people who are far more artistically inclined than I am. I'm with you. So I actually have a facade on my keezer. So I did the 2x6 collar. So very, very basic. By the way, we didn't mention or spend too much time on this. When you're building your collar, this is another area where you want to measure 15 times, cut once. And when you put it together, it has to be level. If not, you are not going to get a proper seal on your lid. But once you put the collar on, what I do at least is I secure it with real like liquid nails, so that it's already secured to the top of the chest freezer, and then you set your lid on top of that, put your hinges down, and attach them that way. And you want it, you don't want to like move it around too much. I just had my wife kind of hold her hand down on the lid, and then I attached once everything was square, I attached the hinges, and I've not had any issues. It seals perfectly, all of that. Now, so I had 2x6 all the way around, and then I took some, I believe it was like 1x6, and stained that real nice. My wife picked the color, and it was just pine. A lot of people use hardwood because it looks really pretty. It's a lot more expensive, so I didn't do that. And then I got some decorative bolts and kind of put those through. And that's my keezer. I mean, it looks pretty neat, and you can kind of go wherever direction you want with decorating these things. I think that's kind of a fun part behind the whole building a keezer. Again, biggest benefit, you can go whatever size you want. I've got my local friend here, Matt Human, who has, I believe he's got a 21 cubic foot chest freezer that he can fit like 12 beers, 12 kegs in or something like that.
Yeah. The cool, one other thing I just remembered about keezers is actually what's cool about the size of them is that they're all basically the same depth. They just change length. So if you have space, I'm like, I got 3 kegs, and then you're like, actually, I think I want to go to 6. You just add length, you don't add depth. So you can kind of think forward. If you're thinking in the future about how you're going to use this thing, they only get longer. They don't necessarily get deeper. The other thing I wanted to bring up, or at least how I do mine, is, like I said, it's a simple thing. I have 4 taps, and I have a couple air manifolds on the side. So the tanks sit outside of the kegerator. just to save space. The other thing I do is 4 taps only 3 are beer. One of them is dedicated to CO2. And at the top of the show we talked about cold side aeration oxidation. What I like to do is if I'm filling growlers, because I'm serving myself beer, but inevitably as a home brewer, you're taking people's growlers, you're filling them up, you're going to competitions, whatever.
Right.
That is there just to purge anything, and then I fill from that. And that way, it's really nice packaging. I have no issues. I just dedicate it to it. I don't even want to say like, okay, hey, I need to make this CO2. It's never touched beer.
Yeah.
It's only CO2.
Yeah. That's cool. And that is another thing is if you could choose to store your CO2 cylinder either inside or outside of your refrigerator or chest freezer, if you are going to store it outside, again, you're going to have to drill a hole into the vessel or this chamber or whatever, so that you can get that CO2, that gas line into your manifold or your secondary regulator. So make sure you consider that. I've always just kept the cylinder in my keezer, and when I had a kegerator, I just kept it in there. It does take up space, so that's something you got to keep in mind. Now, I keep mine on the hump. Chest freezers have a compressor hump that you can store stuff on, so I keep the cylinder on that. If you go a bit bigger on your collar, you can actually, especially if you're using pin lock kegs, you can actually fit more kegs up on that hump. You just have to make sure that your collar is big enough that it will fit your keg with the disconnects attached, because that's the problem. You'll see people, I've seen people measure it out. Oh, I got about an inch there. Well, that disconnect's going to add more than that, especially with the tubing coming off of it. You probably want to have a good 4 or 5 inches there of just a wiggle room.
Yeah, I've used that hump for either storing just liquids, just sodas or other bottles of beer. You can put your gas there. You can also get like 2.5 gallon kegs or like even 1.75 gallon kegs. And then you have these extra kegs if you want to just have something loose hanging around. I also carbonate water, add some juice to that, have some seltzer water, so you can have that too. So there's a lot of options. You can use all this space if you need to. Yeah.
I actually will store, if I have not enough room in my fridge, I'll throw extra beer cans down on that hump. So it's pretty convenient. Now, I've been using a keezer for many years at this point, and so it's not all peachy. There are things about them I'm not a huge fan of. The biggest thing for me is I'd say once every 4 or 5 months, I have to go in there and knock the ice off of the front of the the wall of the chest freezer, and it's just build up because again, you're bypassing a thermostat that wants to freeze everything in there, and so it's going. What it does is it kicks on. It gets as cold as it possibly can until your your probe measures that it's at your set temperature, and so in doing that, you'll at least in my experience, and again, I keep my chest freezer pretty cold. It will start to form ice, and it just starts to, it'll get to the point where you can't really fit as many kegs in there because you've got this big ball of ice clinging to the front of your chest freezer. All I do is I have a really long flathead screwdriver. I just get it down in there in a rubber mallet, and I just knock it off and then go in and pick it out with my hands. It's not a huge deal, but it is kind of annoying.
Yeah, I think I have a similar thing. Just I have the other phase of water. I have sometimes little puddles of water that come up, and so you just got to monitor those, maintain those. Eventually, you could get mold, you could get other problems, and then it's just more of a mess. So you do have to have that maintenance, and I think that is, other than the ice or the liquid, that is part of it. It's harder to get in this thing. It's tall, right? So unless you can, get a step stool and climb in there, I mean, it is just more cumbersome, moving kegs around, though, it's easier to pull the kegs out. If your lines get in the way, and, I've built these things so they're more compact. And that does mean like, okay, well, I have to think about which beer is going to be pulled out of which keg and that kind of thing. So just be careful, I guess. Space is a premium, or space can be a premium in these if you fill them out with all these kegs.
Yeah.
So just think about that.
Yeah, and again, consider the type of keg you got, ball lock or pin lock, or if you want to do commercial kegs. I mean, I've built, Jersey and Tim both have keezers that we built together, and all they serve is commercial beer in those. And so I think Tim's is a 7 cubic foot chest freezer, and he can fit one full size keg, or one pony keg, like the 7 3/4 gallon kegs. So that'll be the Miller Lite that he's serving, and then he'll get one of the 6 stools of like Modelo or something, and that'll be next to it, and that fits really nice. But if you want to store more, you're going to have in a smaller space, probably best that you go with ball lock for a keezer because you can squeeze more together. Again, I would search the internet. Like you said earlier, Andy, there are really great guides out there. It seems like every brand of freezer and refrigerator has been tested. Somebody is using one and they've put how many kegs of each type that they can fit in there. But that's the stuff you got to think about when you're planning on building a kegerator or a keezer. And in the years that I've been brewing, there's nothing that I've done that has made the process more pleasurable than going from bottling to kegging. And that is just where I'm at. I do think that's about it when it comes to building and using kegerators and keezers. I'm really excited to go. As soon as we get done here, I'm going to go out and rethink what I'm doing. And I've got all this unopened beer line and those duo-tight stuff that I can't wait to put to use. But if you're considering doing it, I can't recommend it enough. Make sure you think about this stuff before you start making purchases and drilling holes into your refrigerators.
Yeah, and we said earlier, this it is not necessarily for everyone. I think there's styles that only benefit from bottling. Belgian style sour beers, bigger beers that are going to age. So you're going to still, you're not going to retire all that bottling equipment. I think you're still going to use it. But the benefits of the kegging, again, upfront costs. With all the home brewing stuff, there's all these costs that come up.
Yeah.
But I think the reward is high, and it just the flexibility of serving draft beer at home. That's great.
Yeah, it's so fun. And that's the thing is there will be, those moments where at least for me, I'm kind of an existential thinker anyways. And there's these moments where I go out into my garage and I'm like, dude, I can just pull a pint of beer right out of my garage that looks like I'm sitting in a brew pub. How cool is that? And I made this, I absolutely love it. And if you have been considering going from bottling to kegging, I think you will too. Alrighty, well, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to stay current on everything we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.